Tonight on Primetime Politics, auto tariffs. Donald Trump unveils his first set of tariffs affecting the auto industry, targeting vehicles made outside the United States. What impact will that have on Canadian workers and the national economy? We'll examine the issue. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. Well, we begin this evening with some breaking news as Donald Trump unveiled his plan to apply tariffs to foreign-made vehicles, slapping 25% on cars and trucks made outside of the United States. Take a listen to what we heard from Trump himself.
And what we're going to be doing is a 25% tariff on all cars that are not made in the United States. If they're made in the United States, there's absolutely no tariff. We start off with a 2.5% base, which is what we were at, and we go to 25%. And basically, as you know, and as you've been seeing, not reporting as accurately as it should be reported because it's a massive story. Business is coming back to the United States so that they don't have to pay tariffs.
So that was Donald Trump from just about an hour ago. And to talk about this, we're now reaching out to Brian Kingston. He is the president and the chief executive officer for the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association. Brian, thank you for joining us. Now, as I said, this is obviously some late-breaking news for us as we go into the program this evening. But hearing what you've just heard from the U.S. president, what will the impact of this decision be on the Canadian industry?
Well, this is deeply concerning. If you look at the Canadian automotive industry, it has developed and been designed on the basis of an integrated North American supply chain. And what I mean by that is that parts and components move back and forth across the border numerous times, and the overwhelming majority of finished vehicles that are built in Canada end up in the United States. So if a tariff is in force of upwards, it sounds as though this tariff is actually going to be applied on top of the existing U.S. tariffs. So you'd be looking at about 27.5% on vehicles and 50% on trucks. It makes it very challenging to send product from Canada into the United States. And that's significant because this industry drives the Canadian economy with hundreds of thousands of people employed, and it's our second largest goods export.
Well, and it will also have an impact on the future. I'm going to read to you this statement. This is from Candice Lang. She's the president and the CEO of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. I know you probably know her. And this is the statement she released not that long ago. She says, quote, "The consequences of today's escalation in this destructive tariff war will not be contained to Canada as much as the U.S. administration would like to pretend. Throwing away tens of thousands of jobs on both sides of the border will mean giving up North America's auto leadership role, instead encouraging companies to build and hire anywhere else but here. This tax hike puts plants and workers at risk for generations, if not forever." What's your reaction to that assessment from Candice Lang?
Well, look, I don't disagree with a lot of what she has said. You know, it almost feels as though we need a painful reminder of why protectionism doesn't work. If the U.S. is going to ultimately move forward with these tariffs and reduce the amount of imports into the market, I do expect that other global partners will retaliate. And so as a result, the automotive manufacturing industry based in the United States will lose access to markets around the world, all in an effort to protect the U.S. market. That is not good economic policy. That means that you will have costs going up, production going down, less vehicles being sold, and everybody is worse off. So that's unfortunately where these protectionist policies will ultimately take us. And that's why, frankly, I do remain an optimist. And, I just believe this is so bad economically for the U.S. that it ultimately cannot sustain.
Although, Donald Trump makes the argument that what he's trying to do with these tariffs is bring all auto manufacturing to the United States. In the statement he made this evening or late this afternoon, he outlined examples of where that's already happening. Will these tariffs actually accomplish what Donald Trump is aiming to do?
Well, look, there's no doubt that when you put in place big trade barriers like this, particularly on goods, you do encourage more of that activity to occur inside the tariff wall. Where the argument doesn't quite work out, though, is that manufacturers don't just build in the U.S. for the U.S. market. they export, and that's what makes them successful. And so if you look at the U.S. manufacturing industry for automotive, the U.S. sends more vehicles to Canada than it does to China, Mexico, and Germany combined. We are an important market with nearly 2 million vehicles sold in Canada every year. And you can look at markets around the world where you see U.S.-built products. So my concern here is that you put in place this big tariff wall, you isolate the U.S. economy from the rest of the world because other countries will try and reduce imports of U.S. vehicles in retaliation. The net result, we're all worse off. The economy shrinks, and that is the lesson that we've learned from past bouts of protectionism. So it may feel good in the short term, but I can assure you, long term, these policies are a loser for all involved.
Well, in terms of immediate impact, you know, I hear what you're saying, but that's going to take some time, perhaps take some time to convince the U.S. administration. But in terms of the impact here at home, what are we talking in terms of dollars, in terms of jobs, and people's livelihoods?
Yeah, so the automotive industry is a big contributor to the Canadian economy, about $18 billion in GDP, over 130,000 direct jobs in automotive manufacturing. It sounds as though there is going to be effectively an exemption for U.S. parts in vehicles that are produced outside of the United States and make their way back into the U.S. market. We'll have to see how that plays out because, of course, in Canada, because of our high levels of integration with the United States, a Canadian-produced vehicle has very, very high levels of U.S. content in it. So we'll have to work through that and determine how significant the tariff will be for U.S. manufactured vehicles. I also do still think that there is an opportunity to work with the Americans on renegotiating our trade agreement. I mean, we just went through this process 4 years ago to put in place the USMCA, so there has to be a pathway to ensuring that we continue with open borders and markets in North America. That said, given how dependent we are on the United States, if these tariffs go forward, there are no opportunities to reduce them. It will have an impact on manufacturing in Canada because we simply don't have an opportunity to sell vehicles to other markets. This is all about sending product to the States.
Mm-hmm. Now, this does not actually go into effect until April the 2nd. You know, when we got word this afternoon that this tariff announcement was going to come down the pipes, there was this question as to whether or not they would be immediate. It looks like it's actually not going to be in effect until April the 2nd. What does that mean for you and the work that you see that needs to be done between now and then? Because we're only talking about a few days here.
Well, I think you'll see a couple things. I mean, first of all, from a political perspective, very important, of course, to try and continue to work with the Americans and make the case for our trade agreement and the importance of the North American market. So that's priority number one. Number two, though, I think you will see auto manufacturers trying to get as much product into the United States as possible. The U.S. doesn't have the capacity right now to build enough vehicles to satisfy demand. There's capacity in the U.S. to build about 10 million vehicles, and they sell about 16 million annually. So you could expect huge market disruptions in the United States as inventories decline and people just don't get product. And so that means prices are going up. And we keep reminding folks that tariffs are taxes. That's what they are. They're not paid by foreign countries. They're going to be paid by the American people. So I think you're going to see some interesting market dynamics over the next couple of days as people try and adjust to this.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm wondering what you're hearing from American auto manufacturers on this one, because obviously it's an integrated system as it is right now. What are you hearing from the Americans?
Look, at the end of the day, we just want to make sure that North America is competitive as a global auto manufacturing jurisdiction. And there's a lot of competition out there right now, particularly as the industry transforms to electrification. China in particular is going to have enough capacity by the end of this decade to satisfy anywhere between 75 and 80% of global vehicle demand from one country. So that is a real threat that we have to be concerned about. And it's very difficult to compete with a juggernaut of that size if we're doing so on the basis of 3 separate markets in North America with massive tariff barriers in place. So the competitiveness of this industry has been founded on integration. If we're going to succeed into the future, particularly into electrification, where Canada has all of those minerals that are necessary for next generation batteries, we've got to be working together and pulling in the same direction. So that's what I'm hearing, and I do hope that there's a path forward for the North American market.
Okay, well, Brian Kingston, we will speak again. Thank you for this evening.
Thanks so much.
Now, as we said, we got word of these Trump auto tariffs in the early afternoon, and we were told they were coming. Too late for many of the political parties to respond, but early enough to ask the Conservative leader for his reaction while he was holding a campaign event in Montmagny, Quebec. Take a listen to what we heard from Pierre Poilievre on the tariffs.
My message to him again is knock it off. These tariffs are simply causing chaos in markets. They're dislocating workers on both sides of the border. Stop threatening Canada with tariffs. Stop talking about our sovereignty. Our two countries have been two wonderful friends over centuries. It is better to build on that Canada-U.S. friendship as two separate and sovereign countries.
Now, as for the Liberal leader, he held an event earlier this morning before the White House made it known that auto tariffs were coming. But Mark Carney did make a tariff-related announcement, unveiling a $2 billion plan to address threats to the Canadian auto industry from Donald Trump. Coincidental, but take a listen to what we heard from Mark Carney.
On average, an auto part crosses that border, often through that bridge, over that bridge, 6 times before final assembly. And in a trade war, that's a huge vulnerability, tariff as it goes into the United States each time. So what we need to do is build more of those autos and more of each auto right here in Canada. In the new world, that will be an advantage. That will help insulate us from President Trump's trade threats. And it'll grow the economy right here in Windsor and across southwestern Ontario.
Now, for the record, we also reached out to the NDP hoping for some reaction this evening, but at last conversation, they say they're still working on a statement and will release it later. Well, Mark Carney, in his capacity as the Prime Minister, did react to the Trump tariffs this evening. He was in Kitchener, Ontario, with the president of Unifor, Lana Payne. Let's take a listen to what he said.
President Trump announced 25% tariffs against our auto industry. And this is a direct attack, to be clear, a direct attack on the very workers that I stood in front of, Unifor workers I stood in front of this morning at the Ambassador Bridge, a bridge that is a symbol and a reality up until now of the tight ties between our two countries, ties of kinship, ties of commerce, ties that are in the process of being broken. We will defend our workers. We will defend our companies. We will defend our country, and we will defend it together. Les États-Unis sont divisés, et ça les affaiblit. Mais nous sommes plus forts quand nous sommes unis. Et nous sommes unis ici au Canada. Les syndicats, le gouvernement, les sociétés, les travailleurs. You know, this will hurt us, but through this period, by being together, we will emerge stronger. I think what's happened, and this was part of our discussion, over the course of the last several months, Canadian workers, Canadians as a whole across this country, have gotten over the shock of the betrayal and are learning lessons. We have to look out for ourselves, and we have to look out for each other and work together for each other. And I just want to say a few words before taking some questions about what my government has done to turn that sentiment into reality. We made a commitment a few weeks ago to use every dollar that we collect from retaliatory tariffs to support workers, to directly go to support workers. And last week, we made a series of changes to the EI system in order to take the first big step to make good on that promise. There'll be more. We've announced, of course, retaliatory tariffs. We have other options for those retaliatory tariffs. I have asked for a meeting, I will convene, rather, a meeting of the Canada-U.S. Cabinet tomorrow to discuss our trade options. But we're also providing the option of major liquidity for our companies. We put in place an ability for companies to delay tax payments. We've put in place a large facility for our largest companies, some of them which may be affected by this, would be affected by this, to draw on liquidity in various forms so that they can take longer-term decisions without undue pressure from short-term unjustified actions. It's also why we focused, in part in anticipation of what might happen, on today's announcement that I made in front of that Ambassador Bridge for the $2 billion Strategic Response Fund. And the point of that fund, the point of government procurement, the point of linking up through supply chains, the point of working with labor, led by Unifor, is to build a made-in-Canada supply chain, a made-in-Canada option, so that we are less affected by these. Now, that will take time, but we're already putting in place the building blocks for that. To be clear, we are standing together, standing for Canadian workers across levels of government, and I would add that Premier Ford and I have discussed this already at length, and we will have more discussions in terms of our overall approach. But together, we are stronger. Nous sommes unis, et nous sommes Canada fort. And with that, I think we have time for 2 questions before I go to my next event. This evening, I will, je vais observer, je reviens à Ottawa ce soir pour d'autres réunions en ce qui concerne ce sujet. D'accord. Première question.
Do you have any clarity on how Canada will be impacted and how parts will be treated? And how will you respond? Will you retaliate?
Yeah, this is a crucial question. I'll give a short answer. We do not yet have the executive order. And so there are different variants of the 25% announcement that was made today. One would be that it is only on the, this is still significant to be absolutely clear, but on the part component of a car. Another would be that it's on the entire vehicle. We await the executive order for that clarity. But to be absolutely clear, but even in the more, quote, restricted version of this, it is a significant action. It's entirely unjustified. It's entirely inconsistent with CUSMA and indeed the long history of relations in the auto sector right back through the Auto Pact.
Oui. Est-ce qu'on peut avoir la traduction avant d'avoir la question, s'il vous plaît?
La dernière question?
Non, non, oui, en fait, sur votre réponse.
OK.
Oui, juste traduire.
OK. En ce qui concerne les détails, ils sont des grands détails. C'est de grandes questions. C'est le tarif, le nouveau tarif américain, c'est 25% sur l'automobile en total ou les pièces, les components. Même dans la situation, même dans la deuxième situation, c'est sérieux pour notre industrie. Et on verra, on attend l'ordre exécutif du président. Mais n'importe quel choix, c'est une violation. Il a trahi notre code commercial. Et c'est le président.
Ma question, c'est est-ce que vous allez avoir une réponse immédiate? Quelle sera-t-elle?
Okay.
Est-ce qu'il est temps de parler à M. Trump?
Oui. Pour la deuxième partie, oui.
Vous allez l'appeler?
Oui.
Quand?
On verra. Tôt.
Demain?
OK, tôt. Ça suffit. Hein? Mais en ce qui concerne les options, nous avons des options, même pendant une période électorale. Nous avons des options d'avoir des reprises tarifaires. Alors, on va prendre des décisions après avoir la réunion du cabinet canado-américain. Yeah, I think it would be appropriate that the President and I speak, given the action that he's taken. I'm sure that will happen soon. I'm not going to give you a precise timing on that. In terms of options, which was the second part of Ms. Martin's question, even during a caretaker period of government, we have anticipated this possibility. We have put in place the mechanisms so that if it is appropriate for retaliatory tariffs, and there's many considerations to be taken in those regards, and I want to have the meeting of our cabinet, Canada-U.S. cabinet, other considerations. We need to see the details of the executive order, but we will take the steps that are in the interests of Canadian workers, of Canada. We are going to stand up for Canada. We're going to be united, and we will fight in a unified way. And I would say, if I may, and I will, Lana and Ms. Payne can speak for herself, obviously, the discussions that we've had, the discussions I've had with Premier Ford, we're entirely aligned in terms of the seriousness with which we're taking this and the seriousness of our response. Thank you very much.
And that was the Prime Minister Mark Carney earlier this evening in Kitchener, Ontario, addressing the Trump tariffs, 25% that will be applied on April the 2nd on Canadian-made vehicles. Mark Carney calling that a direct attack on Canadian workers, and quote, "We will defend our workers, we will defend our companies, we will defend our country, and we will do it together." Well, with that, let's now go to Quebec City because the Conservative leader also reacted to the Trump tariffs earlier this evening. Take a listen now to Pierre Poilievre.
I want to start by condemning, without equivocation, the unjustified and unprovoked tariffs that President Trump has now announced against our auto sector. These tariffs will damage his workers and his economy, just as they will damage ours. We must retaliate and target goods and services that we don't need, can buy elsewhere, or make ourselves to maximize the impact on the Americans while minimizing the impact on ourselves. But before I go any further about these unjustified tariffs and how we're going to respond to them, let me speak to the workers in the auto sector. You're afraid right now. You're anxious. You wonder how you're going to pay your mortgage or put food on the table. You're thinking about the conversations you may need to have with your little children about whether they can register for next year's hockey or this summer's soccer. You don't know if you'll be able to stay in the same city or what's going to happen to your future. Canada will be there for you. We will be there for you. We will ensure that you have income replacement to put food on the table and money in your bank account. We'll make sure that businesses directly affected will have the liquidity they need to get through this dispute. And we will unite as Canadians to protect our affected sectors. But more than that, we need to become strong, self-reliant, sovereign, so that we can stand on our own 2 feet and stand up to the Americans. What is clear is that 10 years of economic weakness have made us more reliant than ever on the Americans. 75% of our exports go to one country. Almost all of our energy, most of our raw materials go south because we can't get them anywhere else. We need to take drastic action to build an economic fortress in Canada, able to reach other markets around the world, repealing the anti-pipeline law, rapidly building LNG liquefaction plants, mines, factories, expanding and making our ports functional so that we can move our goods to other places around the world, knocking down the barriers between our provinces so that we can trade with ourselves for a change, passing a bring it home tax cut on work, investment, home building, and energy to make this the best place in the world to bring back the $500 billion that Liberals pushed out of the country over the last decade. Then and only then will we be able to properly stand up to the Americans and stand up for ourselves. Now is not a time for weakness. Now is not a time to continue on with the failures that got us into this place of dependency. Now is the time to take back control and relaunch our economy so that we can confront the President's unjustified threats and tariffs in a position of strength. We will do this for our people, for our land, for our home, for Canada first, for a change. Thank you.
Pour aider les travailleurs, M. Poilievre, est-ce que vous allez avoir des baisses d'impôts ou des programmes d'aide ou les deux?
Évidemment les deux. Les gens qui continuent de travailler
auront toujours des chèques de paie, mais ça va être plus difficile pour eux à cause des tarifs qui augmenteront les coûts de la vie. Et eux autres vont bénéficier des baisses d'impôts leur permettant de dépenser cet argent dans les petites et moyennes entreprises de leur communauté, préservant et créant d'autres emplois, tout en permettant ces familles de payer leurs factures. Pour d'autres, il faut utiliser l'assurance-emploi avec une flexibilité, des nouvelles modalités. Le partage de travail, c'est un programme excellent qui permet aux entreprises de peut-être diminuer les heures de certains employés tout en les compensant avec l'assurance-emploi. Ça permet des entreprises de garder leurs employés en même temps qu'ils sont dans une période de difficulté avec leurs revenus. Donc, un plan pragmatique pour aider les entreprises et travailleurs directement impliqués dans la guerre tarifaire, mais aussi des coupes d'impôts pour encourager une croissance économique qui sera nécessaire pour bâtir cette forteresse économique dont on a besoin.
And again, that was Pierre Poilievre from earlier this evening in Quebec City reacting to the Trump tariffs. Now, we can tell you that Mark Carney will reportedly convene the Canada-US Cabinet Committee in Ottawa and in person tomorrow, so we will continue to follow the story for you right here on CPAC. But for now, that is our program for this evening. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC and Primetime Politics, thank you for watching. We'll see you again tomorrow.